Dear students, welcome to our course on industrial organization. Unfortunately, we cannot meet in person on our campus. Anyway, we'll try to make it a successful and a satisfying semester. Despite social distancing and lack of in-person interaction, we'll have a lot of interaction and cooperation, and this started already in WebEx as you saw a few minutes ago. Let me start here, before I go to the details of this course and to the contents of the course, let me start with some administrative information, which you need in order really to successfully pass this course. And therefore, I will go to our web page and in particular to our intranet, the StudIP. Now you should see StudIP. First of all, I guess I start with who we are. Actually, my name is Georg Götz. I hold the chair of Industrial Organization, Antitrust and Regulation. We even have an English version of this web page. Okay, so the web page gives you an overview of what we are doing, makes announcements and so on, particular, for instance, about what the topics of our seminars are and so on. You get a general overview of our research and also of teaching. What is, in terms of this course, probably more relevant to you is what we have in the StudIP in our intranet. So you see up here the StudIP announcement, and obviously you already have been in that course. Here I think I used the German version, but it's also available in English. This gives you, for instance, here this Class X link. It gives you the YouTube link. What you see here, here's how you can access the YouTube link. Next week you will have a new announcement. Oh, I already have an announcement for next week, but not in 2 weeks' time. Actually, it's not for next week, it's tomorrow. That's why I have the announcement. Here you get the information. Here you have also course description. I will get back to that in a minute. You should have read that. It gives you some general information about the prerequisites. So you should have a decent knowledge of undergraduate microeconomics. You should also it wouldn't be bad to have some knowledge of econometrics. And what we will do, and I will get back to that, we will use particular two books by Peppel, Richard, and Norman, but also others. I will get back to how how you get the points, the credits for this course. What I also want to draw your attention to is the Ablaufplan, or the schedule in English. Here you see really a detailed schedule of the course. I try to keep that updated. So today's introduction, hopefully we also can get to something of the review of Perfect Competition as well. And what you see is the course is always so that typically on Tuesdays, here you see Tuesday 3rd, Tuesday 10th, and so on. On Tuesdays, typically there is the lecture, and on Mondays there is the assignment or the tutorial class, which is run, as you heard a few minutes ago in WebEx, by Maximilian Geil. Okay, and here you see this is all of our program we will discuss this semester. I will get back to that, but you should always have that in mind. And here in Dateien, in files, you find both in assignments, first of all, the instructions for how to submit the assignments, the instructions for how the tutorial class is run in Microsoft Teams, and the problem set of problem 1. We will get back to that later. You also obtain here or get here the lecture slides. So here you can download the lecture I'm going to present today, and I will in due course also upload the other chapters. Okay, that's about what I wanted to tell you in terms of the information and how we provide it. I also, and I just have to look for that here, I also want to briefly show you, hopefully you see that now, the PDF, which is just the problem set 1. Okay, this is a problem set 1. Actually, I just see that there's a typo here in the headline box. It says industrial organization, there's an N missing. And here you see again the syllabus, which is nothing else than this course description we had before. And I don't want to go through that because that will be part of what I'm doing today anyway. You see the prerequisites here with some information. You see that the literature is actually, I don't know, I just can try whether I make it here. If you can well see that this is the Pepple-Richards-Norman textbooks. Actually, there are two. This is in a sense the intermediate, and this is the more advanced one. Of course, we also, or it's always good if you also look in the Bible of I.O. The Bible of I.O. is Short-Tirol's Theory of Industrial Organization. And finally, what I also use for certain topics is Paul Belflam and Martin Peit's book on industrial organization. Okay, actually there's also a typo here I saw somehow because it's Belflam rather than Belfam. Yeah, I already told you what the class time is. Oh, and you see already I made a mistake. I have to jump back to my Adobe here. You see what the class time is and how we do it. What is probably more important is what the course requirements are and how you obtain your final mark or how you obtain your credits. There will be a final exam, and you actually get 85 points in this final exam. In total, you can get 100 points here. There's also participation in the exercise class, in the tutorial class, which makes then up the remaining 15%. We will have the submission or to submit the solution to this problem set, what you see here, and you will get each week one, and there will be, I don't know whether there will be 12 or 13. Anyway, you can get at most 13% or 13 points by submitting these assignments, and you get another 5, at most another 5 points for in-class participation and presentation. What does that mean? It typically means that you submit your solutions, and then in class you just explain or present that. Okay, the solutions to some of these problems, and there you then get your points. And as you see, you can get a max of 15 here and a max of 5 here and a max of 13 for submission, but in total it can be at most 15%. Okay, that's what we have. Yeah, how do you submit that? First of all, you already saw that problem set 1 is already available in StudIP, and there's also some information. This problem set 1 is due next Monday. Okay, of course, before you have the tutorial class at 4, so you have to submit it by noon so that Max can have a look at it, and you should send. Oh, actually, you should scan. It's only a PDF typically, I guess, Max. So that's what we typically do. You should send a PDF to this address, and actually you need to use a very specific subject line, okay? Because we receive hundreds of emails on this account, and if you use the wrong subject line, it doesn't get to the right folder, okay? So use the right subject line, which is available in this information document. Okay. What you should do, and what I really recommend, is that you form working groups of 3 to 5 people. So we don't want to receive, I don't know how many, there are just at the moment 48 or 47 participants here in WebEx. So what we want is that you form groups of 3 to 5 people, and that you together submit a single solution. Okay, of course you have to state, everyone has to state his matriculation number, okay, Matrikulationsnummer, and his or her name. And so you just submit that, and really it's hard to cooperate right now, but just use MS Teams, okay? you can form working groups in MS Teams. Just do that, coordinate that on MS Teams. And a final point here, you could submit it in the course notebook, Kursnotizbuch. I will also, actually, that's what I can even probably also show you. Oh, Kursnotizbuch, okay. I try. Now you should see lecture 1 Kursnotizbuch. I cannot go higher because then your names would be, if you're already in a team, your names would be available here, and I don't want to de-anonymize you. But you see here, here we will have, for instance, if I make or if I try to illustrate something here, I will do that here in these lecture notes, and actually that's what you also can see then. Typically it's Q and P, so we would have a demand function here, and that's what you can also access then in your Kursnotizbuch, for which you can then use also the Windows app. Okay, if it's not clear, no problem. Just submit the assignment, and Max will make that clear next week to you. Yeah, and I just jump back to my stud IP. Yeah, here you see how. I went to the wrong. Here you see the problem set. Okay, you see these are typically some formal or analytical problems. Here you have to derive a demand function for a quasi-linear utility function, have to calculate the price elasticity and so on. Here you should calculate the equilibrium of a perfectly competitive industry and so on, and here solve a monopoly problem, etc. Here, of course, the problems here are pretty much refresher problems, which you already should have heard in your, at least mostly. Some of the things will be more advanced, but at least mostly you should have heard that in your undergraduate micro course. But anyway, so how these problems look like. And later on, you will also have in these problem sets problems from former exams. So you always get some idea how that works. Yeah, welcome back again to industrial organization. After giving some introduction to or some overview of how we are, of course, organization and administration, I want to start with the contents we are dealing with. Here you see the overview. I will get back to that at the end of the introduction, with which I start right now. Okay, introduction. What is I/O, or what is it about? A frequent definition is that it's a study of the structure of firms and markets and of their interaction. One could also say industrial organization is that branch of economics that is concerned with imperfect competition. In a market economy, it is key to understand how markets work, in particular how markets work with only a few firms being active and in which strategic interaction matters. Jean Tirole, Nobel laureate in economics, I think in 2014, has a quote in the introduction of his textbook I just showed you, where he says, "Why should one be interested in industrial organization? This question sounds almost silly. To study industrial organization is to study the functioning of markets, a central concept in microeconomics." So we study how markets work, how they function. Okay, and so what are in more details the topics we are studying? We study how firms behave in market, and this covers then a whole range of business issues. It covers pricing of goods and services. It covers innovation in the sense of which new products companies introduce. It covers mergers decisions. So which company takes over, or do companies take over other companies? And it also discusses methods for attacking or defending markets. I will get back to the further examples on the next slide. The important point is that we always take a strategic view of how firms interact. And that's a difference or the opposite to the passive view or the price-taking view we typically have under perfect competition. There it doesn't matter what your rival competitor does, because both of you are price takers, and so the only thing is you can do is just to adjust your quantity and accept the price. Here in the kind of imperfect competition we look at, you have to take your rivals' actions and reactions into account, and that's what we turn to in the next slide. So the question is, for instance, how should a firm price its product given the existence of rivals? Okay, think of just to gasoline stations. If you set a high price, you just might be undercut by your rival firm. How does a firm decide which markets to enter? Should you really enter what is now called the kill zone? Do you want to produce or do you want to enter the market with a new search engine where Google is your competitor? Okay, so and where Google might react. And there are many very interesting examples. I think these examples are quite a bit outdated, because I don't know whether you remember the Microsoft case, which took place in the early 2000s. Recently, it gained some prominence again because the DOJ, the Department of Justice, which has an antitrust division in the United States, started a case against or litigated draw Google to court. Okay, and this is very similar to the Microsoft case in the early 2000s, where Microsoft where it was alleged that Microsoft abuses its dominant position, and that's the claim the Department of Justice now brings against Google. Okay, we have many up-to-date and interesting examples. I don't know whether I don't know what Fortnite is, but some of you younger guys will know what Fortnite is, and there is currently a case ongoing, Apple against Fortnite. Okay, where Fortnite complains against the 30% commission Apple takes from every user of Fortnite. Okay, and there's also another case, Spotify against Apple, where Apple again takes a commission or a share of 30% of the revenue of Spotify. Okay, you see, this is rather interesting in a sense, or hopefully it's interesting, but it's anyway in terms of antitrust, it's rather relevant. Here I have a case from the vitamin cartel. I'm also acting as a consultant here in various cartels, and right now I'm involved in four different court proceedings. One concerning the sugar cartel, one concerning a drugs cartel, one concerning an elevator cartel, and another information exchange in detergents. Okay, you see, cartels are everywhere, and this is a very interesting field for IO economists to work in, and lucrative as well. Okay, yeah, here we have Toys R Us, an exclusive dealing topic, which is more or less also related to some exclusivity you might have on certain platforms like Android or something like that. Predatory pricing, where we're famous cases of Lufthansa against Germania, they are already something out or somehow outdated. But here we always have case, for instance, of the German Federal Cartel Office against Facebook, in a sense where they abuse their dominance by to charging a low price. Actually, they charge a price of 0, but they want too many data. So here it's less a predatory pricing, but it's abusive pricing. Okay, but of course it makes also, if you have a price of 0, it makes it also hard for entrants to enter. Bundling, this Telekom Austria Tic-Tac tariff is here because I was involved in that case. It was a case concerning telecom tariffs, of course, but bundling is currently in the Google case very important, because Google, if you want as a smartphone manufacturer, if you want to have Android on your as a platform or as an operating system on your smartphone, you also have to pre-install the Google suite with Google Chrome, with Maps, and so on. Okay, that's a condition. Merger wave is also a rather interesting thing. That's what we always have right now. The discussion is often about so-called killer acquisitions. What are killer acquisitions? Actually, what might have become the most important rival for Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp? How do you solve such a problem? You buy these companies, okay? That's how you might solve that. And currently, antitrust authorities also start to put more scrutiny on these cases. The problem is that, do you know how many employees WhatsApp had when they were acquired by Facebook? I think it was 12 or 13 or maybe 20, but anyway, but each of them became a billionaire because I think Facebook paid, I don't know, $18 billion, okay? Yeah, now many interesting examples, and I hope you come up with more questions during the course. The point is, all of these problems are problems of strategic interaction, okay? You always have to take into account what your rival does and how your actions affect your rival and vice versa. That's what's always important. So if you're Facebook, you better look whether there is some potential entrant which might put a danger to your business. Okay? Yeah. Now, how does the theory of industrial organization proceed in order to solve all these questions, in order to address the question or answer the question whether Google really should be prosecuted and in a sense, just for instance, there was even a discussion whether Google or whether Facebook should be separated, okay? Or whether, for instance, Amazon is no longer allowed to both run the marketplace and sell item on its own, okay? And there's a discussion on self-preferencing and so on. I will get back to that. Anyway, in order to solve all these problems, industrial organization typically relies on the tools of game theory, because game theory are just the tools which you can use in order to analyze situations of strategic interaction, okay? And the subject of the course accordingly is the strategic interactions between firms. What we do not cover is more or less the internal organization of firms and the goals of firms. In terms of the goals of the firms, we will typically just assume that they are profit maximizing, okay? That's our standard assumption. And we abstract from problems of principal agents where managers might not have the right incentive and might pursue own goals rather than maximizing the profit of the firm. So we do not say much about the internal organization of the firm. That's a topic of the theory of the firm and or of the theory of the boundaries of the firm. And this is a strand of literature which was in particular spelled out by Oliver Williamson, based on a Nobel laureate, based on the contributions of Ronald Coase some 50 years ago. And this transaction cost theory starts from some definition of transaction costs. And transaction costs are the expenses of trading in excess of the price of the commodity. On the next slide, this should become clear what it means, okay? So here the transaction costs and the theory of the firm relies on some basic concepts, and these are that markets and firms are alternative means for completing transactions. Just to take an example, think you're a car manufacturer, okay? You are Volkswagen. Should you produce your own batteries, or should you buy these batteries from, say, Samsung or Tesla or from whatever? If you're still producing combustion engine cars, should you develop your own transmission, or should Bosch do that for you, or Continental? Okay, That's questions we have. And here the point is, of course, what does this mean? Markets and firms are alternative means for completing transactions. Yeah, in order to buy a car, you either can do everything on your own as Volkswagen, even have your own steel factory, or you can buy some parts from just some suppliers like Continental, like ThyssenKrupp, and so on. Okay, and that's a question then. How should you structure your company? That's about the boundaries of the firm. And of course, you can do that in a sense in-house, or you can outsource it to the market. And how you do it, that will depend on the relative costs of these alternatives. Okay? And these relative costs will depend very much on the characteristics of the decision makers involved and the characteristics of the market. On the next slide, we will have, for instance, the number of potential suppliers. If you know there's only one supplier of good batteries in the market, you know you would depend on that, on this supplier, on this company, and then it's perhaps a good idea to produce it on your own, because otherwise you might be just held up and exploited by this company. Okay? And there are also human and environmental factors which vary across firms and markets. Here in Germany, we recently had a lawsuit where Volkswagen litigated against Prevent, which is a supplier and a manufacturer of car parts. And they even stopped deliver. So Prevent stopped delivering Volkswagen the parts they wanted, and Volkswagen had to stop its production for some time. Okay, so here you see many questions and many problems. The most important point is, or the most important question is the make or buy question. Do you want to make some parts of your product on your own, or do you want to buy that, to outsource that to the market? And transaction cost theory wants then really to explain how these environmental and human factors explain firm and industrial organization. So one of these key factors is then what we have here, opportunism. So do you guess, do you think that if you rely on this part supplier run by this guy, you can trust in this guy or in her or not? And that's an important question, because you might run into opportunism as a buyer, because if you rely on if you decide to not produce it on your own, and if you know you rely on this single seller, you might really be exploited by a very high price this company charges. On the other hand, if you're a seller and have only a single customer like Volkswagen, for whom you produce a specialized equipment, a specialized machine tool, a specialized robot, and this robot is not worth anything in alternative uses, then you also run into trouble, because it might be that you are then held up, and Volkswagen tells you, oh, actually we said we will pay you 10 million, but it turned out we rather want to pay only 5 million. Okay, this would be opportunism, and this is also related to what is called bounded rationalities. These contracts or these transactions are very, very complicated. You don't know all the contingencies. You don't know all the problems which might arise. Okay. You don't know, and this then relates also to uncertainty here, you don't know in which ways a seat belt might not work. Okay, there was an important case by, I think it was called the Japanese company Takeda, where seat belts failed. Okay, and we had many insured people. Okay, yeah, so all these problems determine, or the extent to which these problems arise determine whether you want to make something on your own in your company, or whether you buy or acquire it on a market. And finally, of course, the number of firms will also be important, because if you know there are 150 suppliers of batteries, you better don't build an own battery factory. Okay, so all these points matter for how our firm will look like here. It also explains the industrial organization, but in particular, it explains firm organization. And Sanford Grossman and Oliver Hart said in a very famous article in 1986, the theoretical framework that captured both the costs and benefits of integration. Hopefully you got some idea here. We won't follow this strand of research, not in this course in more detail here, even though it's a very important and productive one. Oliver Hart and Bengt Holmström received a Nobel Prize for their contributions to these kinds of questions in 2016. Professor Max Albert has a course called Institutional Economics, which deals with some of these questions. I have another master's course in Economics of Regulation, where we also deal with principal agent model, where we face some of these opportunism problems and so on, problems of asymmetric information, which matter a lot in these kind of theories. Okay, so that's what I wanted you to know about what we do not cover, even though it's a very interesting and important topic. So, given that we do not cover this part, what do we cover, and in particular, how do we proceed? Of course, this is mainly a theoretical course on I/O, so you will learn about many different models, and typically, these models are abstractions. These are models like they are used in physics, and now we also can tell they are used in medicine and epidemiology. Okay, how does a virus spread? Okay, and how do contacts matter? These are all models. Okay, and in engineering, it's used where they make models how safe are SUVs, how seat belts work, and so on. So you will see many models here. And these are abstractions, of course, and the important point is to get the abstractions right, to make the right kind of assumptions and so on. Okay, so what for are we doing this analysis of strategic interactions? Of course, we want to understand markets. And in particular, we want to understand the competition, and that is then the strategic competition, which arises in these markets. Okay? Okay. And I just unmuted someone in the WebEx. That's why I have a problem right here. But now I'm getting back to understanding strategic competition. So the point is here, our study is very much related to the marketing and industrial management literature. Professor Bausch does related topics or covers related topics in his courses. Professor Haas also in particular has related topics in terms of pricing and so on. And probably the most famous management thinker who applied the I/O research in a sense to these kind of management problems is Michael Porter from Harvard Business School. And he has this famous 5 forces framework that shapes strategy. Of course, the first thing we want to do, and here's our first bullet, here's our second. The first bullet or the first thing we want to understand is strategic competition. How does that work from a viewpoint of a firm? Okay. And the second point, of course, as we are economists, we are always interested in a social perspective in terms of welfare. The question is, we want to evaluate market outcomes. And of course, the standard question is this market outcome efficient? And if it is not efficient, we know the monopoly, for instance, is typically not efficient. Can public policy improve upon that situation? Okay, can it improve or can it achieve a better solution? And that's what is typically done in antitrust and competition policy. We won't deal so much with that here. That was in particular the topic in for instance, in intermediate IO course of competition policy and strategy, but we will cover some of the topics in particular as they are related to, for instance, discussions of price discrimination and so on. Okay, here just to show you a very nice diagram of Michael Porter, how he thinks about strategic management and about in particular these 5 forces that shape industry competition. And you will see once we get into a detailed overview of the topics of our course, this is very similar to what we are doing. Of course, we are looking into rivalry among existing competitors. These are so-called incumbents, and that's where we will look into, say, standard or workhorse models of imperfect competition, like the Cournot model, like the Bertrand model, and so on. We will also look into entry and, in a sense, a deterrence of entry. That's what happens here. There are many models. I don't know whether we'll have the time to look into the bargaining power of suppliers. That's of course rather straightforward, because that's like a monopoly supplier, and now the customers are just not final consumers but just companies. Okay, remember this Prevent and Volkswagen example. And bargaining power of buyers. This is another important topic. Bargaining power of buyers is an important aspect in particular of grocery, food retailing. Okay, Aldi, Lidl, Rewe, Edeka, they have buyer power with respect to the farmers and so on, to their suppliers. Okay, and of course it's always the final question. You're afraid of substitute products or services. Think your telecoms companies, you have some or railway companies, and now all of a sudden you get Flixbus, you get far distance coach buses, okay? And you get now competition from a rather new angle. Okay, so the point here was to show you that it's rather here the how managers and how researchers on business strategy you apply or employ very similar tools than what we are doing, we as IO economists. Okay, and actually many IO economists work in business schools. Okay, yeah, IO, the behavior of firms, both of dominant firms and groups of firms, have long been discussed, and that's the example I gave you here. It's all started with Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations in 1776. He already mentioned the need for and the importance of antitrust policy. What he already claimed is that, or what he already stated is that the monopolists, by keeping the market constantly understocked, by never fully supplying the effectual demand, sell their commodities much above the natural price. So that's what you already know. Monopoly pricing leads to a deadweight loss. That's not a good thing. And the question, of course, is what can policy do here in this respect? Okay, and even though it's rather straightforward that a monopoly restricts output, and that's a bad thing. If we look into other business strategy like price discrimination, it's not as straightforward that this is a bad thing. And that's particular, for instance, one of the two of the topics we are going to discuss. Okay, another point is here, this is about collusion and cartels, and this has to be part of every IO and antitrust course. This kind of quote from Adam Smith is that people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment or diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. Okay, it's clear we don't deal with straightforward horizontal cartel as the beer cartel I mentioned, or even though that's not so straightforward, or the drugs cartel. If or cement cartel if people say, or if companies say, I only deliver in the southeast of Germany and you deliver in the northwest of Germany. And if some customer from that part approaches you and wants a quote, a price quote, you just tell him or her that you just cannot deliver for whatever reason. You know that this is a bad thing, okay? It's not so easy if we have some vertical relations, like the ebook case, where Apple and US publishers formed some or had some agreement which actually served to break the dominance of Amazon's Kindle. Okay, and it's rather interesting and important to have good theoretical models in order to analyze that. And at least we will give you the concepts and the frameworks in order to address these kinds of problems. Okay, so just to give you some history in a heartbeat. So it all started in a sense with the French, with Cournot. Of course, it always starts with Adam Smith, okay? But then it in terms of I/O, it started about in the mid 1800s. So in the mid 19th century, about 1850, with the first model by Cournot. It's actually the Cournot model of quantity competition. Then I think it was in about 1880 or 1890, Joseph Bertrand. Okay, I just move on and you tell me if there are problems. So it all started with the French, with Cournot and Bertrand. These are in a sense a workhorse model I will present to you. And we also have the Edgeworth model of, in a sense, oligopolistic competition, which was a rather, in a sense, negative view, because Edgeworth was of the opinion that an equilibrium does not exist, and what he explains or developed were the so-called Edgeworth cycles, which is what you observe in gasoline prices, where you see that prices jump up on Monday and then they go down over the week and then they jump up again. Okay, that's Edgeworth cycles. In the mid 20th century or in early 20th century, Chamberlain did some studies, some empirical studies, and also invented the model of monopolistic competition, hoteling, and I will present that to you in some detail. In about, I think, 1929, published his paper on spatial competition, okay? And in the 50s and 60s, this was already the high time of the so-called structure, conduct, performance paradigm, where you had a lot of I/O talk or research looking into an industry and trying to come up with conclusions about the performance of the industry based on the structure of the industry. I will get back to that on the next slide, because this is already a very important part which deserves some further thoughts. In the 60s and 70s, you had then a Chicago school critique, a point I also will mention in the next on the next slide. In the 70s and 80s, this game theory revolution of I/O started. It was called the New Industrial Organization, and an important proponent of that theory was or is Jean Tirole, who received the Nobel Prize in 2014 for his analysis of market power and regulation. And in the 1990s, again, so this was a very theoretical part, the structure, conduct, a very empirical approach, the structure, conduct, performance. Chicago School was more theoretical, but it has a limited complexity in a sense. Modern game theory was very complicated and more theoretical models. And here again, we had a new empirical industrial organization, which then combined theoretical or model theory with empirical estimations, the so-called structural I/O. And one proponent one might arguably call is Ariel Pekes, who also received the Nobel Prize. I don't know when but he received it in particular not for his, or less for his work on empirical I/O, but more for his work on what is called market design, on auctions and so on. Yeah, I told you that I will tell you a little bit more about these Harvard School, in particular with here this book by Joe Bain. Okay, so here, I don't know whether you can see that here, Joe Bain. He did a lot of study on structure, conduct, performance, also with Edward Mason, and I think this was all built on the work of Clark, in a sense. And what did he do? What is structure? Now, market structure is, for instance, a number of firms, or in particular, how concentrated a market is. And what they did is they run studies on how concentrated a market is, then concluded, for instance, if the market is very concentrated, you expect a certain conduct, a certain behavior by firms. And if it's very complicated, you might expect something like collective dominance or tacit collusion. If you had an I/O or the competition policy course, you will know what tacit collusion is. It's just some kind of collusion, but without explicit kind of agreements. And if you have this conduct, you have a certain performance in terms of prices and in terms of profits, because if you have a very concentrated industries, it will be easy, the story goes here, for firms to coordinate and to raise the price, and therefore we will have a bad performance in terms of a very high price. But this bad performance in terms of the higher price is good for the companies because they have high profits. Okay? The problem with this approach is it's not so clear what the direction of causation is. Okay, there's certainly a correlation between, or very often a correlation between, say, concentration and rate of profit, but you don't know why why a firm earns a very high profit and has a high market share. Is it because it is so efficient? That's what the Chicago School would have argued. Okay, an efficient firm, of course, grows and has a high market share because it has a low cost. Okay, and so the point is, if you collect profit data on firms in an industry and you explain differences due to firm size or firm organization or financial leverage, that do they have deep pockets, it's not so clear how the causation runs. Is it that they have so much money where they do so much, or that they do so much R&D or are so successful because they are just efficient and good, or is it because they have so much market power? Okay, and in particular in US antitrust practice, this led to a very significant change, for instance, with respect to how mergers are viewed. Given you have the idea that structure, conduct, performance, the structure, conduct, performance paradigm works, it's very important to prevent firms from becoming very large to get very large market shares. And there's a famous Brown Shoe case where a merger was declined or blocked, where the total US market share would have increased from 6 to 7% or something like that. Okay. Later on, it was the U.S. antitrust policy was based on the Chicago School, and director George Stigler much more lenient and approved many more mergers. Since the 70s and 80s, game theory inspired new interest in I/O, and now you looked into these cases in more details. Okay, into more markets or into more in models and so on. And in the 90s, I already told you, these empirical analysis started, in particular with differentiated Bertrand models. We will also get back to that. Here, just an overview, too large, taken from the Dennis Carlton and Jeffrey Perloff textbook, Modern Industrial Organization. Here, just some basic market structure. So what is clear, perfect competition has no barriers of entry, and that leads to many to a large number of firms typically. It also has many buyers because there are also no barriers to entry for buyers. A monopoly has a very high entry barrier and you have only a single firm. Say the entry barrier is just a patent you have and you're the only one to produce a vaccine for corona, COVID-19, okay? And typically you have many buyers. It might also be the opposite, that you have many sellers, but only a single buyer. Just think of the UK, of Great Britain, with the National Health Service. If you want to run a hospital, you have to be refunded by the National Health Service. There's only one buyer. Okay. In Germany, if you want to sell some weapons for military purposes, you only can sell it to the Bundeswehr. Okay, to the army. And oligopoly should be clear that you have some entry barriers and therefore you have only a few firms entering. And oligopsony is the same thing in terms of buyers. You have many sellers, for instance, with pharmaceutical products, and think of our statutory health system with our statutory health insurances like AOK, like all these Krankenkassen. Okay, so here you have only a few sellers, but in terms of medical doctors, but you have many medical doctors who sell the services, but they are only reimbursed by a few of these health insurances. And finally, monopolistic competition, we won't deal with that at great detail here. It typically has also no entry barriers. It has many firms. It has some market power because firms sell a differentiated products and you have many buyers. Yeah, structure, conduct, performance. As you saw, formally it was just these three things here. And researchers assumed in the 50s and 60s that this is the direction of causation. Okay, you have certain structures in terms of the number of, I can even go to the next thing here, in terms of the number of buyers and sellers, and this determines then what the conduct will be. Okay, so you have barriers to entry, for instance, product differentiation and so on, and it determines then the conduct in terms of advertising. Think of Coca-Cola for research and development, in particular in terms of pricing behavior. Okay, and also, for instance, whether firms collude or not. And that then leads to a certain, probably I should here erase that, to a certain performance in terms of the price level, in terms of productive and allocative efficiency, think of the deadweight loss, and in terms of profits. Okay? But what this diagram really shows you, that the world is much more complicated right now. Because here we have these basic conditions. Actually, you will see in many cases we just what we call endogenized market structure. It will depend on properties or features of the consumer demand, just as the elasticity of demand, whether closed substitutes exist on market size, and so on. What will also be very important, and that will be part or chapter C, is technology, whether you have a technology with large scale and scope economies, which then consider or constitute technological barriers to entry, and which, if you have large scale economies, will lead to a case where you have only a few firms in the market. And think in terms of pricing behavior. You might also, if you have too high prices, or in terms of say, there was this self-preferencing by Amazon, or by Google anyway. If you put the companies offering something on your platform at a disadvantage, government policy might react. Okay, or think in terms of these price parity clauses we saw for hotel booking platforms. Of course, if you have just a price parity clauses, at least that's what the Federal Cartel Office, Bundeskartellamt, argued, this will constitute an entry barrier. Okay, because an entrant can no longer undercut you if no hotel is allowed to charge a lower price, even if it offers its even if it offers its product on another platform. Okay, so that was in a sense the introduction. I just want to give a brief overview of the topics. Actually, most of them I already gave you some examples. So we will start with some refresher from your intermediate micro course on perfect competition and monopoly. We will also discuss what a durable or who's the most important competitor of a durable goods monopolist. So who is the most important competitor of the Apple iPhone? Actually, I should say the Apple iPhone 12. It's the Apple iPhone 10. Okay, you also compete against older versions of your own product. Okay, then we will discuss this technology and cost. Remember the technological barriers to entry, economies of scale, and so on. Price discrimination, linear price discrimination. Is it good that students always get a better deal than professors in terms of price discrimination? Or is that bad from a welfare point of view? Non-linear pricing is something what you get in terms of, for instance, your subscription to mobile phones, where you often have a flat rate, which is not a linear price, because the more you make phone calls or the more data you download, the lower is your per unit price. We will also discuss product variety and quality. Product variety, I think Procter & Gamble has 56 varieties of Head & Shoulders shampoos. Is that efficient? Is that an efficient number or is that an efficient product variety? Product quality is another point. It should be clear. Should be very good cars, or should be high quality cars, low quality cars, and so on. Bundling is another topic. Is it good that Google is able to bundle Android with its Chrome and say Maps and Gmail products and so on? Then we go to our standard workhorse model of static competition, the Cournot quantity competition, the Bertrand price competition model, where we will also learn about the Krebs-Schenkman model. And finally, also some dynamic games. You will hopefully know or have heard of the Stackelberg game, where you have a Stackelberg leader and a Stackelberg follower. And we will have discuss entry deterrence by means of capacity expansion as well. So this is a so-called Stackelberg Spence-Dixit model. We will also discuss horizontal product differentiation. That's where we will discuss a hoteling model of spatial competition, and also love of variety approaches. We will have vertical product differentiation, so competition between firms where one firm is a high quality firm and the other firm is a low quality firm. We will discuss advertising. Okay, is advertising a good thing? Is it informative, or is it a bad thing because it's in quotation marks, it's manipulative? So that's what we also will discuss. And research and development will be a short part. This is basically a preview on of the economics of innovation course I teach in the summer. And if time permits, I will also discuss some kind of asymmetric information problems. Okay, so now it's really time for a small break. If you have any questions, before I move on, I'm just available in WebEx right now. Yeah, let's start with our first formal chapter in a sense, a review or a refresher on competition and monopoly, which you already should have, or the topics here which you should already have heard in your intermediate studies, in your undergraduate studies. Perfect competition. Of course, a perfect competition is what everyone who got an introductory or a principles course in economics should have heard. The important point about perfect competition is that you typically have many firms and that many consumers, and all of these firms and consumers are price takers. That means that firm can sell as much as they like at the ruling market price. That of course requires that this firm is small compared relative to the market. So the capacity is small and we have many firms. Technical aside here, you do not necessarily need many firms. It also is sufficient if these firms believe that their actions will not affect the market price, but typically that holds only if you have many firms. If you think there are special situations, for instance, situations in the steel industry where you have a so-called L-shaped marginal cost curve, and if they are at the capacity limit, they also don't have any chance to charge a different price than the market price. Yeah, and what you hopefully know, and what we also will show on the next slide, is that if you are a price taker, the marginal revenue equals price. That is, if you sell an additional unit, you just always receive the market price. Okay, if you are a farmer and put one more ton of wheat or corn to your, I don't know what the lager house is in English, to your cooperative, you just receive the standard wheat price. Okay, and what is very interesting here in the notes, you always hopefully can also see the notes once you download the slide. I gave you example from Cartels and Prof, and you see that the price elasticities for farmers is of more than 5,000%. So this is what is really perfect competition. If they increase a price by 1%, their demand goes down by 5,000%. So this is a perfectly elastic demand. Okay? Yeah. So, and given that you have this marginal revenue equal price, in order to maximize the profit of any type of firm, that also holds for monopolists. Monopolists will also equate marginal revenue with marginal cost, but here in perfect competition, a price equals marginal cost. So you have price equal marginal cost. Okay, and the formal assumptions for perfect competition, according to Cartels and Prof, to hold are the following. So you have a homogeneous product which is perfectly divisible. So not even though I don't know whether aircrafts are probably they are not homogeneous. Okay, but at least they are not perfectly divisible. Okay, it's also supposed that you have perfect information. That is, in particular, the buyers know at which price they can obtain the product everywhere. You don't have a transaction cost, so that is, they are just located next to each other, these sellers. Okay, otherwise you might get into some kind of spatial competition. Price taking, that's what I told you, and no externalities. Okay, you don't need all of these assumptions in order to have perfect competition, but you need all these assumptions, in particular the last one with the externalities, so that you have an efficient result, so that this Walrasian equilibrium leads to what is the first theorem of welfare economics, that a market outcome is also Pareto efficient. Yeah. More generally, perfect competition only requires price-taking behavior in the absence of strategic interaction, and that means typically a large number of buyers and sellers. That's what I already told you. Okay, and now in a bit more formal terms, introducing a little bit of notation. Typically, we denote the profit with the Greek letter pi. Q is the quantity, R is the revenue, C is the cost, and of course our firm. Remember what we discussed about the theory of the firm. We assume simply that our firm maximizes profit. Okay, revenue simply is price times quantity, and of course price is taken as given by the company. Okay, and profit maximization works by choosing the quantity Q. Okay, just taking the first derivative, standard problem. You get the first derivative of the profit function with respect to output is nothing else than the first derivative of revenue with respect to output, which is our marginal revenue, minus the derivative of cost with respect to output, and that's nothing else than marginal cost. And of course, optimum, you know how to optimize. You just take the first derivative and set it equal to 0. Yeah, that's what I already told you. Marginal revenue, if we take the derivative of the revenue up here with, oh, I make too many notes in my, or lines in my presentation here. If you take the derivative, you get the marginal revenue, and this marginal revenue simply, as price doesn't depend on your own output, on this output of the small farmer, marginal revenue is equal to price. And of course, yeah, the derivative of the cost function is nothing as a marginal cost. Therefore, profit maximization implies that marginal revenue is equal price, and this is equal marginal cost. And if you have this marginal cost function here, so you have the so-called inverse supply function with the marginal cost. And of course, you can then invert it. We will have examples, I think, in the tutorial class or in the assignment class, where you just invert that and get the so-called supply function. The inverse supply function is nothing else. It's a supply curve. The price as a function of quantity versus the supply function is quantity as a function of the price. Okay? And of course, we also have, or always have, a second order condition. We know that here the second derivative of profit with respect to Q has to be negative, smaller than 0, in order to get a maximum rather than a minimum. Now, of course, if we take the second derivative of the revenue, this is simply 0. Okay, and so we are left with minus second derivative of the cost function. Minus the second derivative of the cost function has to be smaller than 0, or the second derivative has to be higher than 0. That means we are in the upward sloping part of the cost curve.
Voice privacy contents have been updated.
Okay. Yeah, and that's just to illustrate that here with the standard kind of diagram, market diagram, with quantity on the abscissa and price on ordinate. So here you have the single firm, and here you have then the aggregate output of the industry. Suppose this is a demand function. Suppose this is the industry supply function, of course, which is made up of all the individual functions. And here you have the market price. Oops, what was this? With market demand D1 and market supply S1, the equilibrium price is simply here this price, PC, and market quantities QC. And what we typically have here in the long run equilibrium, that's what you should know. We have this marginal cost curve which intersects the average cost curve, which is U-shaped, given that we have some kind of fixed cost. It intersects that in the minimum, and of course this is what is called, oh, do we have that? Most efficient scale or minimum efficient scale, the minimum of the average cost curve. And what we have here is, of course, with this price, this upward sloping, I don't know what all is here, let's just draw something. This upward sloping part of the marginal cost curve is nothing else than our supply curve. Okay, and now it looks so ugly, I just erase it again. You just, if you have some price given, you just give or have the respective output. If the price were here, your output would just be this here, of course. Okay, now here we have an equilibrium. This is already a long run equilibrium. And if you have many of these firms which are all symmetric, now, if the price changes, what happens? Now, if the price changes to D1, I guess the price would increase. And again, I erase that here. The price would increase. Each firm would produce more. Okay, each existing firm would produce more, but it would also make profit. I don't know whether we excess profit here. That would be, this would be the profit of each firm, okay? They would make profits. And what happens under perfect competition if firms make profit, and that's what's written here, excess profits induce new firms to enter the market. What does this mean if new firms enter the market? Now, the supply curve shifts outward, moves to the right. Okay? And price falls, and when is this finished? Actually, if all firms are symmetric and there are no scarce resources for that industry, in terms of specific inputs, you end up again at the long run equilibrium in the minimum of the cost curve, of the average cost curve. Okay, so that's what you certainly should have heard in your undergraduate course in intermediate microeconomics. Yeah, now if you have a given number of firms, we already can denote the industry supply curve here. That's what we just had here. It's just the horizontal aggregation of the individual supply curve. If we get then the short run equilibrium, here we have demand, here we have supply. We just solve for the short run equilibrium by solving for the market price, given the number of firms. In the long run, we have free exit and entry. And actually, and in the long run, there cannot be any excess profits in the sense of economic profits. Okay, zero profits always mean, and I hope you know that and are familiar with that. Zero profits also always mean just that you cover all your costs, including your capital cost. Okay, and that means your revenue is equal to your cost, your total cost inclusive capital cost inclusive opportunity cost, and this is just zero. But that means if you divide that by Q, revenue divided by Q is nothing else than the price, and cost divided by Q is nothing else than the average cost. And you get price equal average cost, and that was actually what you saw here. In the long run, price is equal to average cost here. Okay, that was this point here. Okay, and of course, firms need to be small for this to hold with equality, because otherwise you get into trouble with the integer constraint. So if only 4 firms fit into the market, it's highly likely that you don't get exactly this kind of price. If you have 165, the integer problem is very small. But of course, the number of firms in a market is not a perfect indication of competitiveness of the market. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that a market with 1,200 firms is more competitive than a market with 165 firms, because both firms are likely, both markets are likely to feature zero profits. And here the minimum efficient scale here, or most efficient scale, that's how this MES is called. This is just here the quantity where we have the minimum of the average cost curve. Okay? And what about this most efficient scale? If this is large, compared to the market, you have few firms active in a market. If it's small, you have many firms active in the market. And here I just want to draw your attention to a few very nice studies which are already somehow, they are not outdated, but they have performed some long time ago, more than 50 or almost 50 years ago. Here you see different industries, okay, selected industries. And you see in beer brewing, you have a most efficient scale or minimum efficient scale of 3.4% of the market. That is, you can have about 30 firms, 30 breweries in a market, each working at most efficient scale. Okay, and here what you see by which unit cost rises, the percent by which unit cost rises if you only have a third of that size. So here minimum efficient scale is 4.5 million barrels. A barrel is 31 gallons or whatever this is in hectoliter. I don't know. So you take it as an exercise to calculate that, how big that is. But so you see, if you are smaller, your cost rise. But here you see you can have at least 30 firms in the market without any, in a sense, cost penalty due to insufficient size. Okay, what you see if you look at cotton and synthetic fabrics, you have a much lower minimum efficiency case, so you can have 500 firms here in the market. So you are quite sure that you will have perfect competition here as well as with non-rubber shoes. But with refrigerators, you see you need 800,000 units, and that's already 14% of the market. So here you do not expect, or it's not so clear that you will have perfect competition here. It's more likely that you will get something like an oligopoly here in terms of refrigerators. Okay, batteries is also something here where you expect many firms. I don't know how relevant it's with the newer product or production today, but anyway. Here is another case from another study by Leonard Weiss, who does a similar exercise with similar results. Here, flour mills, you see you will have many mills, okay? More than 100, and you have a very low penalty if you are at a smaller size. Whereas in terms of what is here, turbo generators, okay? So these are really large generators, and you see there are only 4 firms which fit in the market. So this is Siemens, which is Westinghouse, this is General Electric, and so on. Only 4. And I don't know, I think we have also commercial transport aircraft. I think this changed a lot, but it was 10% at that time. In the late 90s or early 70s, you still had several companies producing aircraft: McDonnell, Douglas, of course Boeing, and so on. But today it's really just Boeing and Airbus. Okay, you see diesel engines also. You have only a few firms being active, and you might have a rather high penalty. So the point here is that the technology might determine the market structure here, and you see that in some circumstances you expect perfect competition, under other you expect an oligopoly. Before we go to the monopoly, we will go to pure monopoly as the other extreme case, as the other benchmark. Our first benchmark in our IO course is perfect competition, where we know everything is in a sense efficient, and we have both cost and allocative, or cost efficiency, that means product efficiency, and allocative efficiency, and then the next thing will be the pure monopoly, but you will have to wait until tomorrow so that I cover that. So given that we are finished here, or that I finish here, I just want to thank you for being with me, and also for the discussions on WebEx. I will now be available for some more time for further discussions and questions in WebEx. I hope you enjoyed it, and meet you tomorrow. Thank you and goodbye.